When my boyfriend of 4 years looked me dead in the eye and said those words while packing his designer suits, he had no idea I had already interviewed 3 candidates to fill his position. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting strategic. I'm Sarah Chen, and this is how I turned the worst breakup of my life into the most empowering chapter I never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our downtown Seattle apartment. I was rushing around getting ready for my job at Meridian Marketing while Marcus lounged in bed scrolling through his phone, which had become his full-time occupation since getting laid off from his tech startup 6 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now the sole breadwinner supporting both of us, while he claimed he was between opportunities and needed time to, quote, find his passion. I had been patient, understanding, even encouraging. After all, relationships are about supporting each other through difficult times, right? I covered our rent, groceries, his car payment, and even his gym membership, because I believed in us. I believed Marcus would find his way back to being the ambitious, driven man I fell in love with during our first year together when he was climbing the corporate ladder and talking about our future with such certainty. That morning, as I grabbed my coffee and headed toward the door, I noticed Marcus was still in bed despite having promised me the night before that he would spend the day job hunting. This had become a pattern. Promises made in the evening, forgotten by morning. I paused at the bedroom doorway, watching him laugh at something on his phone screen. "Don't you have that interview today with the consulting firm?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the frustration building in my chest. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Oh, that. Yeah, I rescheduled it. The position wasn't really what I'm looking for anyway. I need something more senior level, you know? I can't just take any job that comes along." I stood there feeling the familiar knot in my stomach that had become my constant companion over the past few months. Marcus had turned down 4 job offers in the last 2 months, each one apparently beneath his standards despite the fact that our savings account was dwindling rapidly and I was working overtime just to keep us afloat. "Marcus, we talked about this. Any income right now would help while you look for something better. I can't keep covering everything indefinitely." Finally, he looked up from his phone, and I saw that expression I had grown to dread. The mixture of annoyance and condescension that suggested I was being unreasonable for expecting basic adult responsibility from my 31-year-old boyfriend. "Sarah, relax. You worry too much about money. Something will come up. It always does." He waved his hand dismissively. "Besides, you're doing fine carrying things for now. What's the rush? What's the rush?" As if my working 60-hour weeks to support his lifestyle was just a temporary inconvenience, rather than a fundamentally unsustainable situation that was slowly draining my energy, my savings, and my respect for him. I bit back the words I really wanted to say and instead forced a smile. "Okay, well, I have to go. There's leftover pasta in the fridge for lunch." As I drove to work that morning, I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had with my best friend Melissa the week before. She had been unusually direct, asking me point-blank why I was still with Marcus when he clearly had no intention of getting his life together. At the time, I had defended him, talked about how relationships require sacrifice, and how everyone goes through rough patches. But sitting in Seattle traffic, contributing to a household while my partner contributed nothing but excuses, I started to wonder if Melissa might have a point. The day at work passed in a blur of client, presentations, and strategy meetings. I loved my job at Meridian Marketing. I had worked my way up from junior account coordinator to senior marketing manager in just 3 years, and I was good at what I did. My colleagues respected me, my clients trusted my judgment, and I was making the kind of money that should have afforded me a comfortable lifestyle. Instead, I was living paycheck to paycheck because I was essentially supporting 2 people on 1 salary. When I got home that evening, I found Marcus exactly where I had left him that morning, in bed, phone in hand, though now he was surrounded by empty food containers and had apparently spent the day binge-watching some new series on Netflix. "How was your day?" I asked, setting down my laptop bag and noticing that the breakfast dishes were still in the sink exactly where I had left them. "Pretty good," he said without taking his eyes off the screen. "Oh, and we're out of milk. Can you pick some up tomorrow?" "We're out of milk." As if he had been too busy to notice during his day of unemployment, to perhaps walk the 3 blocks to the grocery store himself. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom looking at this man I had once admired for his ambition and drive, now wearing the same sweatpants he'd had on for 3 days and asking me to add grocery shopping to my already overwhelming list of responsibilities. "Marcus," I said carefully, "did you do anything today? Apply for jobs, clean the apartment, anything productive?" He finally paused his show and looked at me with that same irritated expression. "I'm taking some time to figure out what I really want to do with my career, Sarah. I can't just jump into the first thing that comes along. I have to be strategic about this." Strategic. He called lying in bed for 6 months strategic, while I worked myself into exhaustion to pay for his strategic planning period. That night, as Marcus snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and doing mental calculations. If I didn't have to support him, I could actually save money again. I could travel, maybe even buy a place of my own. I could stop feeling like a walking ATM and start feeling like a partner in an equal relationship. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine what my life might look like without Marcus in it, and the relief that washed over me was both surprising and telling. The next few weeks followed the same exhausting pattern. I would go to work, come home to find Marcus had accomplished nothing, then spend my evenings cooking, cleaning, and trying to manage a household while he remained glued to his phone or gaming console. The few times I tried to have serious conversations about our future, about his job search, about our financial situation, he would either change the subject or become defensive, accusing me of being impatient and unsupportive. "Not everyone can just throw themselves into corporate life like you do, Sarah," he said during one particularly frustrating conversation. "Some of us need time to find meaningful work, not just take any job for the sake of having a paycheck." Meaningful work. As if paying rent and buying groceries was somehow beneath him, while being perfectly acceptable for me to handle alone. It was during this time that I started paying attention to how differently my life looked compared to my friends and colleagues. My coworker Jennifer would talk about weekend trips she was planning with her husband, how they were saving for a house, how they were building a life together. Meanwhile, I was canceling social plans because I couldn't afford them after covering Marcus's expenses, and the thought of saving for anything seemed like a fantasy when I was already stretched thin supporting 2 people. One evening, about 3 weeks before everything exploded, I came home to find Marcus on the couch with his friend Tyler, both of them drinking beers and playing video games. Tyler worked a steady job in construction and had always seemed like a decent guy, but seeing him there while I walked in exhausted from another long day, knowing that I had bought those beers with money I earned while Marcus.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Contributed nothing. Something inside me snapped. "Hey, babe," Marcus called without looking away from the screen. "Tyler's staying for dinner. There's stuff for sandwiches in the kitchen." There's stuff for sandwiches that I bought with money I earned after working a 10-hour day. And now I was expected to come home and prepare food for his friend, while he continued his marathon gaming session. I stood in the doorway holding my work bag, looking at these 2 grown men who apparently expected me to serve them dinner, and I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. "Actually," I said quietly, "I'm going to order myself some Thai food and eat in the bedroom. You 2 can figure out your own dinner." I saw Tyler glance between Marcus and me, clearly sensing tension, but Marcus just shrugged. "Sure, whatever. We'll just order pizza." With money he didn't have. Pizza that I would ultimately pay for when the credit card bill arrived. I ordered my Thai food, ate it alone in our bedroom, and spent the evening updating my resume for reasons I wasn't quite ready to admit to myself yet. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in early October. I had just received news that I was being considered for a promotion to marketing director, a position that would come with a significant salary increase and more responsibility. I was excited to share the news with Marcus, imagining that maybe this would be the motivation he needed to get serious about his own career, or at least that he would be happy for my success. I found him in our living room, sprawled across the couch in his usual uniform of sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, controller in hand. The apartment was exactly as I had left it that morning. dishes in the sink, takeout containers on the coffee table, his clothes scattered across the furniture. "Marcus, guess what?" I said, unable to contain my excitement, despite the mess surrounding us. "I might get promoted to marketing director. The salary increase would be incredible, and it would really help our financial situation." He paused his game and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's great, babe. More money is always good. It would mean longer hours sometimes, but the opportunity for growth is amazing. And with the extra income, maybe you could take some time to really focus on finding something you're passionate about instead of just taking the first job that comes along." That's when his expression changed. The casual disinterest transformed into something darker, something that made my stomach drop even though I couldn't yet articulate why. "So now you're going to be even more of a workaholic, and I'm supposed to be grateful that you'll be making more money to support my passion projects?" His tone was mocking, cruel in a way I had never heard from him before. "That's not what I meant," I said, confused by his reaction. "I thought you'd be happy about the promotion. And I thought, maybe with less financial pressure, you could take your time finding the right opportunity." He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Right. So I can be even more dependent on you while you climb the corporate ladder, and remind me every day how successful you are compared to your unemployed boyfriend." The words hit me like a physical blow. I realized that somewhere along the way, Marcus had started to resent my success, rather than being proud of it. Instead of being motivated by my achievements, he seemed to see them as a personal attack on his masculinity or worth. "I have never made you feel bad about your situation," I said quietly. "I've been nothing but supportive while you figure things out." "Supportive?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call constantly asking about job applications and making little comments about money? Is that what you call working all the time and then coming home stressed about bills?" I stared at this man I had loved for 4 years, wondering when he had become someone who could twist my genuine concern and support into attacks on his character. When had my working hard to keep us afloat become something to resent rather than appreciate? "Marcus, I work hard because someone has to. I stress about money because we don't have enough of it. I ask about job applications because we're a team, and teams support each other through difficult times." "A team?" he said, standing up from the couch with that same cruel laugh. "Is that what you think this is? Because it feels more like you've appointed yourself the manager of my life and my career." The unfairness of that statement took my breath away. I had been carrying the entire financial burden of our relationship for 6 months, never once complaining, never once making him feel guilty about his unemployment, always encouraging and positive even when I was exhausted and overwhelmed. And somehow, in his mind, I was the one being controlling and unsupportive. "I've been paying for everything for 6 months, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "Everything, Marcus. Your car, your food, your entertainment, your gym membership. I've been working overtime and skipping social events, and sacrificing my own financial goals to keep us afloat. How is that being controlling?" "Because you're always throwing it in my face," he exploded, and I realized that this resentment had been building for longer than I had understood. "Every conversation about money, every question about my job search, every time you look tired after work, it's all just a way of reminding me that you're the one with your life together and I'm the failure." I felt something break inside me then, not my heart, but something deeper, the fundamental belief I had held that we were partners, that we cared about each other's well-being, that we were working toward the same goals. In that moment, I realized that Marcus didn't see me as his supportive girlfriend who was helping him through a difficult time. He saw me as his financial benefactor, who was making him feel bad about accepting charity. "If that's really how you feel," I said quietly, "then maybe we need to reconsider this relationship." The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. I hadn't planned to say them, hadn't consciously decided that this was the conversation where I would finally stand up for myself. But there they were, hanging in the air between us, and I found that I meant them completely. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The anger faded, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Sarah, come on, you don't mean that. We're just having a fight. All couples fight about money sometimes." But I wasn't backing down this time. The clarity that had been building for weeks suddenly crystallized into absolute certainty. This isn't about fighting, Marcus. This is about the fact that you resent me for supporting you, instead of being grateful. It's about the fact that my success makes you feel bad about yourself instead of making you proud of your girlfriend. It's about the fact that you see my love and support as some kind of attack on your independence. That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. What's not fair is me working 60-hour weeks to support someone who doesn't appreciate it. What's not fair is feeling guilty about my own success, because it makes my boyfriend feel inadequate. What's not fair is being made to feel like I'm the problem in a relationship where I'm the only one contributing anything. We stared at each other across our living room, and I could see him trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation back to familiar territory, where I would apologize for being too demanding and he could go back to his comfortable unemployment without any pressure or expectations. "Look," he said, his tone shifting to the patronizing voice he used when he thought I was being emotional and unreasonable. "You're obviously stressed about this promotion thing. Why don't we just table this conversation until you've had some time to think clearly?" Time to think clearly. As if my objection to supporting a grown man who resented me for it was just a temporary emotional reaction that would pass once I calmed down. "I am thinking clearly," I said, "probably more clearly than I have in months. And what I'm thinking is that I deserve better than this." That's when I saw the flash of something ugly cross his face, something that told me he had been thinking about this conversation too, just from a very different angle. "Better than this?" he repeated, his voice taking on that mocking tone again. "Better than what, exactly? Because let me tell you something, Sarah. You're not exactly a catch. You're 30 years old, you work all the time, you have no hobbies outside of your career, and you're so uptight about money that you make spreadsheets for grocery shopping. You think you're going to find someone better than me?" The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But more than that, they revealed exactly what Marcus really thought of me, how little he valued what I brought to our relationship, how easily he could weaponize my insecurities when he felt threatened. "Maybe I will," I said quietly. "Maybe I'll find someone who appreciates that I work hard instead of resenting it. Maybe I'll find someone who sees my financial responsibility as a positive trait, instead of a personal attack. Maybe I'll find someone who wants to build a life with me instead of having me bankroll theirs." "Good luck with that," he said, and there was genuine cruelty in his laugh now. "Because here's the truth, Sarah. You're not going to find anyone else. You're too demanding, too controlling, too focused on your career to be the kind of woman men actually want to be with. I'm probably the best you're going to do, and if you're smart, you'll figure that out before you throw away 4 years over a stupid fight about money." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there looking at this man who had just told me, in the cruelest way possible, that I was lucky to have him, that my ambition was a flaw, that my financial responsibility was a burden, that my success was something that made me less desirable rather than more. But instead of the devastating blow he intended those words to be, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Crystal clear, overwhelming relief that he had finally shown me exactly who he was and what he thought of me. Relief that I no longer had to wonder if I was being too demanding or too impatient. Relief that the man I had been supporting and sacrificing for had just revealed himself to be someone who saw my strengths as weaknesses and my love as leverage. "You know what, Marcus?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're absolutely right. I am demanding. I demand respect, reciprocity, and partnership. I am controlling. I control my own life, my own finances, and my own future. And I am focused on my career because I have goals and ambitions beyond lounging on someone else's couch for 6 months." He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "And if those things make me undateable, then I'd rather be single than settle for someone who sees them as problems to be managed rather than qualities to be appreciated." I turned and walked toward our bedroom, my heart pounding but my mind clearer than it had been in months. Behind me, I could hear Marcus sputtering something about me being dramatic and needing to calm down, but his words seemed to come from very far away. In our bedroom, I pulled out my laptop and began researching apartment listings. Not because I had decided to move out, not yet, but because I needed to see what my options were. I needed to know that I had choices, that I wasn't trapped in this relationship by circumstance or fear. As I scrolled through one-bedroom apartments I could afford on my own salary, I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. I was happier looking at pictures of empty apartments than I had been living in this space with Marcus. The thought of coming home to my own place, where I could relax instead of feeling like a guest in my own life, where I could focus on my career and my goals without being made to feel guilty about them, filled me with excitement rather than fear. That night, Marcus tried to apologize in his usual way, bringing me a cup of tea and acting like nothing had happened. But something fundamental has shifted in me during our fight. I had seen behind the mask he wore, the one that made him seem like a struggling partner who needed support, rather than a man who resented his girlfriend for having her life together while his fell apart. "I didn't mean what I said earlier," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed while I continued scrolling through apartment listings. "I was just frustrated. You know, I think you're amazing." I looked up at him, this man I had loved for 4 years, and realized that I didn't believe him anymore. Not because I thought he was lying, but because I understood now that his version of thinking I was amazing only extended to the parts of me that served him. He thought I was amazing when I paid his bills without complaining. He thought I was amazing when I supported his decisions without questioning them. He thought I was amazing when I absorbed his stress and insecurity without reflecting any of it back to him. But my ambition, my success, my financial responsibility, those parts of me were problems to be managed, not qualities to be celebrated. "I think we should take a break," I said quietly, closing my laptop. "A break?" His voice cracked slightly. "Sarah, come on. One fight doesn't mean we need to take a break. We can work this out." "This isn't about one fight, Marcus. This is about the fact that you resent me for the very qualities that make me a good partner. This is about the fact that you've been unemployed for 6 months, and instead of being grateful that I've supported us, you've decided that I'm the problem." "I never said you were the problem. You said I was too demanding, too controlling, and too focused on my career to be the kind of woman men want. How is that not calling me the problem?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out how to walk back words that couldn't be unsaid. "I was angry," he said finally. "People say things they don't mean when they're angry. The problem is, I think you did mean it. I think that's how you really see me, and that's why this isn't working anymore." Over the next 2 weeks, and strange calm settled over our apartment. Marcus seemed to be on his best behavior, helping with dishes, actually applying for jobs, being more affectionate than he had been in months. But instead of making me reconsider my decision, his sudden change in behavior only confirmed that he was capable of being a better partner. He just hadn't seen any reason to try until his comfortable situation was threatened. I continued looking at apartments, and I also did something else. I started paying attention to the men in my life, colleagues, friends of friends, guys I met at coffee shops or networking events. Not because I was looking to date anyone immediately, but because I was curious to test Marcus's theory that I was too demanding and career-focused to find anyone better. What I discovered surprised me. When I mentioned my potential promotion to Jake, a project manager at a client company, his face lit up, and he asked detailed questions about my new responsibilities, genuinely excited about my professional growth. When I talked to David, a graphic designer in our building, about the challenges of working in marketing, he listened with interest and shared his own professional experiences, without once suggesting that my career focus was a flaw. These were normal conversations with normal men who saw professional ambition as an attractive quality rather than a threat. Men who understood that success was something to be celebrated, not resented. Men who seemed to operate from the assumption that a woman's career was an asset to a relationship, not a liability. I wasn't actively pursuing anything with any of these men, but their reactions helped me understand that Marcus's view of my professional life wasn't universal. There were plenty of men who would see my drive and ambition as positives, who would be proud to be with someone who had her life together rather than resentful of it. This realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. Liberating because it meant that Marcus was wrong about my prospects, but heartbreaking because it confirmed that the man I had loved for 4 years had been systematically undermining my self-confidence by convincing me that my strengths were actually flaws that made me difficult to love. 3 weeks after our big fight, I found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, just 15 minutes from my office. It had hardwood floors, big windows, and rent that I could easily afford on my own salary. Looking at it, I could picture myself there. My furniture, my books, my life, organized exactly the way I wanted it, without having to accommodate someone else's mess, or schedule, or financial irresponsibility. That evening, I came home to find Marcus cooking dinner, something he hadn't done in months. The apartment was clean, his laptop was open to job search websites, and he seemed genuinely happy to see me. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing my cheek as I walked through the door. "Good," I said, not mentioning the apartment viewing. "How was yours?" "Really productive." I applied for 3 positions, including one at that consulting firm I interviewed with before. I think I was being too picky earlier. Any of these jobs would be a good starting point. It was exactly what I had wanted to hear for months, but somehow hearing it now felt too little, too late. He was applying for jobs because his comfortable situation was threatened, not because he wanted to contribute to our partnership. He was being affectionate because he sensed me pulling away, not because he had rediscovered his love for me. During dinner, he talked about his plans for getting back into the workforce, about how we could start saving money together once he was employed again, about maybe taking a trip together once our finances were stable. All the things I had wanted him to think about and plan for during the past 6 months, but had never occurred to him until I threatened to leave. "I've been thinking," he said as we cleaned up together, another task he had suddenly rediscovered. "Maybe you were right about me needing to take more responsibility around here. I got too comfortable letting you handle everything, and that wasn't fair to you." I nodded, loading dishes into the dishwasher and trying to figure out how to respond. 3 weeks ago, this admission would have meant everything to me. Now it felt like a strategic retreat rather than genuine growth. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But Marcus, this isn't just about household responsibilities, or even about money. This is about fundamental differences in how we see each other and what we want from a relationship." "What do you mean?" I turned to face him, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I mean that when I got excited about my potential promotion, your first instinct was to resent it rather than celebrate it. I mean that you spent 6 months seeing my support as pressure instead of love. I mean that when we fought, you attacked the very qualities that make me successful and independent. I told you I was angry. I didn't mean those things. But that's just it. I think part of you did mean them. I think part of you does see my career focus as a flaw. I think part of you does resent that I have my life together while yours fell apart. And I can't build a future with someone who sees my strengths as problems." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with how to respond. Finally, he said, "What if I prove to you that I don't feel that way? What if I show you that I can be supportive of your career and grateful for everything you've done for us?" "Marcus, you shouldn't have to prove that you're proud of your girlfriend's success. That should be automatic. You shouldn't have to work at being grateful for support during a difficult time. That should be natural." "So what are you saying? That it's too late? That nothing I do will matter?" I looked at this man I had loved for 4 years, this man who was finally saying and doing all the right things, and realized that the problem wasn't his actions. It was that I no longer trusted his motivations. Every kind gesture felt calculated, every apology felt strategic, every expression of gratitude felt like damage control rather than genuine appreciation. I'm saying that I need space to figure out what I want my life to look like. And I think you need space to figure out who you are when you're not dependent on someone else. That night, I lay awake listening to Marcus breathe beside me and thinking about how strange it was that the end of a 4-year relationship could feel more like relief than loss. I thought about the apartment I had seen that day, about the promotion I was still being considered for, about the conversations I had been having with men who saw my ambition as attractive rather than threatening. For the first time in months, I felt excited about my future, rather than anxious about it. Whatever came next, it would be my choice, my path, my life lived on my own terms, instead of constantly adjusted to accommodate someone else's insecurities and resentments. The next morning, I submitted my application for the apartment in Capitol Hill, not because I had made a final decision about Marcus, but because I wanted to know I had options. I wanted to know that I could take care of myself, that I could build a life that made me happy, instead of one that required constant compromise and sacrifice. When I got home from work that day, I found Marcus waiting for me with what appeared to be a prepared speech. "Sarah, I've been thinking all day about what you said last night, and I realize I haven't been the partner you deserve. I've been selfish and ungrateful, and I've taken your support for granted in ways that aren't fair to you." I sat down across from him, noting that this conversation felt more like a performance than a genuine heart-to-heart. "I want to make this right," he continued. "I want to show you that I can be the man you fell in love with again. I got an interview tomorrow for one of the positions I applied for, and I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to get a job, contribute to our household, and prove that I can be a real partner to you." "And what about the way you see my career?" I asked. "What about the resentment you feel when I'm successful?" "I don't feel resentment," he said quickly. "I was just going through a difficult time, and I took my frustration out on you in ways that were completely unfair. I'm proud of your success, Sarah. I've always been proud of you." But as I looked at his earnest face, I realized that I didn't believe him. Not because I thought he was intentionally lying, but because I didn't think he understood his own motivations well enough to know whether he was telling the truth. His pride in my success seemed to be conditional on his own sense of security, and his support seemed to fluctuate based on how threatened he felt by my independence. "I think we should take that break we talked about," I said quietly. His face fell and I saw panic flash across his features. "Sarah, no, we can work this out. I know we can. Just give me a chance to show you that things can be different. Marcus, this isn't about punishment or about making you prove yourself. This is about the fact that I need to figure out what I want from a relationship, and I can't do that while I'm still in one that isn't working." "But I love you," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I know I haven't been showing it in the right ways, but I do love you. Doesn't that count for something?" I felt my heart break a little bit then, not because I was losing him, but because I realized that love alone wasn't enough. Love without respect, without appreciation, without genuine partnership, was just an emotion that made you feel guilty for wanting more. "Of course it counts," I said gently. "I love you too, Marcus. But love isn't enough if we fundamentally see each other differently. Love isn't enough if we want different things from a relationship. Love isn't enough if we can't support each other's growth instead of resenting it." We talked for another hour, going in circles around the same fundamental issues. Marcus promised to change, to be better, to show me that he could be the partner I needed. But his promises felt like negotiations rather than genuine commitments, and I realized that I was tired of having to convince my boyfriend to appreciate me. That weekend, I received a call that my application for the apartment had been approved. I also received an email that I had gotten the promotion to marketing director. Two pieces of good news that felt like signs that I was moving in the right direction, even though the path was painful and uncertain. When I told Marcus about the promotion, his reaction was everything I could have hoped for: genuine excitement, pride in my accomplishment, questions about my new responsibilities. But instead of making me want to stay with him, his positive response only highlighted how different things could have been if he had been capable of this kind of support all along. "This is incredible, Sarah," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. This is exactly what you've been working toward." And in that moment, I realized that his pride felt too little, too late. It felt like the desperate positivity of someone who was trying to convince me to stay, rather than the natural celebration of someone who had been in my corner all along. The next week, I signed the lease on my new apartment and gave Marcus notice that I would be moving out at the end of the month. His reaction was exactly what I expected: a mixture of shock, anger, and desperate attempts to negotiate more time, more chances, more opportunities to prove that he could be different. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, pacing around our living room while I packed books into boxes. "You're throwing away 4 years over a few bad months. Everyone goes through rough patches, Sarah. That doesn't mean you give up on the relationship." "This isn't about giving up," I said calmly, wrapping my favorite mug in newspaper. "This is about recognizing that we want different things from a partnership." "What do you want that I can't give you?" he demanded. I paused in my packing and looked at him directly. I want someone who sees my success as an asset to our relationship, not a threat to their ego. I want someone who contributes to our partnership instead of just benefiting from it. I want someone who supports my goals, instead of making me feel guilty for having them. I can do all of those things. I have been doing those things this past week. You've been doing those things because I threatened to leave, not because they come naturally to you. There's a difference between changing because you want to grow and changing because you're afraid of consequences. As I continued packing, Marcus alternated between anger and attempts at negotiation. He accused me of being unwilling to work on the relationship, of giving up too easily, of being unrealistic in my expectations. But he also tried to bargain, promising timelines for getting a job, offering to take over more household responsibilities, suggesting couples therapy. All of his offers were things I had wanted months ago, changes I had suggested gently and repeatedly during our relationship. But hearing them now, as desperate attempts to prevent a breakup rather than genuine desires for growth, they felt hollow and performative. 3 days before I was scheduled to move out, Marcus played his final card. "You know what your problem is, Sarah?" he said, watching me pack my clothes into suitcases. "You think you're going to find someone perfect out there, someone who never struggles, or makes mistakes, or goes through difficult times. But that's not how real relationships work. Real relationships require compromise and patience and working through problems together." I folded my favorite sweater and placed it carefully in the suitcase, considering his words. There was some truth in what he said about relationships requiring compromise and patience, but there was also something fundamentally manipulative about the way he was framing my decision to leave as a character flaw, rather than a reasonable response to months of being taken for granted. "You're right that relationships require compromise," I said without looking up from my packing. "But compromise goes both ways. For the past 6 months, I've been the only one compromising. I've compromised my financial security, my social life, my peace of mind, and apparently even my right to feel proud of my own achievements." "That's not fair," he protested. "I've been going through a difficult time. I needed support, and that's what partners do for each other. Partners also appreciate that support instead of resenting it. Partners also work toward solutions, instead of just accepting help indefinitely. Partners also celebrate each other's successes instead of seeing them as personal attacks." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something colder, more calculated. "Fine," he said. "If this is really what you want, if you really think you can do better than someone who loves you despite all your flaws, then go ahead and try. But don't come crawling back when you realize that being successful and independent doesn't automatically make you lovable." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking, but what struck me most was how quickly he had shifted from desperate attempts to win me back to deliberate attempts to hurt me. It was as if he had realized that his charm offensive wasn't working and had decided to try a different strategy, making me feel like I was making a terrible mistake that I would inevitably regret. "You know what, Marcus?" I said, closing the suitcase and turning to face him. "Even if you're right, even if I never find anyone else, I would still rather be alone than be with someone who sees my independence as a flaw and my success as a threat. You say that now, but wait until you're sitting alone in your new apartment on a Friday night, working late again because you have nothing else to do. Wait until you're 40 and still single because you were too picky to appreciate a good thing when you had it." His words were designed to plant seeds of doubt, to make me question whether I was making a mistake driven by unrealistic expectations rather than legitimate concerns about our compatibility. But instead of making me reconsider, they only confirmed that I was making the right choice. The man I had loved for 4 years was trying to manipulate me into staying by attacking my self-worth and my future prospects. "Maybe you're right," I said calmly. "Maybe I will end up alone, but at least I'll be alone by choice, living a life that makes me happy, rather than staying in a relationship where I have to constantly defend my right to have goals and ambitions." That night, my last night in the apartment we had shared for 2 years, Marcus made one final attempt to change my mind. He had cooked an elaborate dinner, opened a bottle of wine we had been saving for a special occasion, and was being more charming and attentive than he had been in months. "Remember our third date?" he said over dessert, a homemade tiramisu, that he had somehow managed to pull together despite never showing any interest in cooking during our relationship. We went to that little Italian place in Pioneer Square, and we talked until they had to kick us out because they were closing. I did remember. It had been one of those magical early dates where conversation flowed effortlessly, and we discovered we had so much in common: similar values, compatible senses of humor, shared dreams about travel and career success. We talked about our 5-year plans, he continued. You wanted to make marketing director by 30, and I wanted to start my own consulting firm. We were both so ambitious, so driven. I fell in love with that about you, Sarah. I fell in love with how passionate you were about your goals. The memory was bittersweet because it reminded me of who we had been at the beginning, before unemployment and financial stress and resentment had poisoned our dynamic. There had been a time when Marcus genuinely admired my ambition, when he saw it as one of my most attractive qualities rather than a source of conflict. What happened to us? I asked quietly. He reached across the table and took my hand, and for a moment I could almost see the man I had fallen in love with 4 years earlier. I got lost, he said simply. I let my own failures make me forget why I loved you in the first place. I let my insecurity turn your strengths into threats. But Sarah, I remember now. I remember who we were together, and I know we can get back there. It was the most honest thing he had said in months, and it made my heart ache because it reminded me of why I had loved him so much in the beginning. But it also highlighted exactly why this relationship couldn't work anymore. His ability to appreciate my ambition and success was conditional on his own sense of achievement and security. When he felt good about himself, he could celebrate my accomplishments. When he felt bad about himself, my success became a mirror that reflected his failures back at him. Marcus, I said gently, the problem isn't that you got lost. The problem is that when you got lost, you decided that my stability was the reason for your instability. Instead of using my success as motivation or inspiration, you used it as evidence that something was wrong with our relationship dynamic. But I understand that now, he said urgently. I understand that I was projecting my own insecurities onto you. I can work on that. I can change. I believe that you can change, I said. But I also think you need to do that work on your own, not while you're in a relationship with someone whose success triggers your insecurities. We talked until almost midnight, revisiting memories from our early relationship, discussing what had gone wrong, exploring whether there was any way to fix what had been broken. It was the most honest conversation we had had in months, maybe years, and in some ways it made leaving even more difficult because it reminded me of the connection we had once shared. But it also confirmed that I was making the right choice. Marcus's ability to be the partner I needed was entirely dependent on external circumstances. His employment status, his financial security, his sense of success relative to mine. I needed someone whose support and appreciation were constant, not conditional. The next morning, as I loaded my car with the last of my belongings, Marcus stood in the doorway watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He had oscillated between anger and sadness over the past few days, but now he just looked defeated. "This is really it?" he asked as I closed the trunk of my car. "This is really it," I confirmed. "You're going to regret this, Sarah. You're going to realize that what we had was special. And by the time you figure that out, it'll be too late." I looked at him standing there in the same sweatpants he had been wearing for most of our relationship, making predictions about my future regret instead of taking responsibility for the choices that had led us to this moment. Even now, even as I was leaving, he was trying to make this about my failure to appreciate him rather than his failure to be the partner I needed. "Maybe," I said simply, "but that's a risk I'm willing to take." As I drove away from our apartment for the last time, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what we had lost, relief at being free from a dynamic that had been slowly destroying my self-confidence, and excitement about starting over. But mostly, I felt proud of myself for finally choosing my own well-being over the comfort of a familiar but unsatisfying situation. My new apartment in Capitol Hill was everything I had hoped it would be: bright, clean, and entirely mine. As I unpacked my belongings over the weekend, I realized how much of my personality had been suppressed during the past year of living with Marcus. I put my books back on shelves, where they wouldn't be moved or complained about. I arranged my furniture exactly the way I wanted it without having to accommodate someone else's gaming setup. I created a home office space where I could work on projects without being made to feel guilty about my dedication to my career. The first few weeks of living alone were an adjustment, but not in the way Marcus had predicted. Instead of feeling lonely or regretful, I felt energized. I could come home from work and actually relax instead of immediately taking on the emotional and financial burden of managing another adult's life. I could make plans without having to consider whether they would interfere with someone else's schedule or budget. I could focus on my new role as marketing director without feeling like my professional success was a source of conflict at home. It was during this time that I started to understand just how much of myself I had been sacrificing to maintain a relationship that was never going to give me what I needed. The energy I had been pouring into supporting Marcus and managing his moods and insecurities was now available for my own goals and interests. I started taking photography classes on weekends. I joined a book club. I began training for a half marathon, something I had wanted to do for years but had never found the time or energy for while managing a household, essentially by myself. 3 weeks after moving out, I received a text from Marcus. "How are you settling in? I miss you." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how to respond. Part of me missed him too, or at least missed the good parts of our relationship. But I also recognized that his reaching out was likely motivated more by his own discomfort with being alone than by genuine concern for my well-being. "I'm doing well," I replied. "Hope you are too." He tried to start a longer conversation, asking about my new job responsibilities and whether I was happy in my new place. But I kept my responses brief and polite. I wasn't angry with him anymore, but I also wasn't interested in maintaining a friendship that would likely involve him trying to convince me to give our relationship another chance. It was around this time that something interesting started happening at work. My new position as marketing director required me to collaborate closely with several other departments, including the design team led by a man named Daniel Chen. Daniel was about my age, with an easy laugh and a passion for his work that reminded me of myself in the best ways. Our first few meetings were strictly professional, but I found myself looking forward to them in a way that had nothing to do with the projects we were discussing. Daniel was one of those people who seemed genuinely interested in what others had to say, who asked thoughtful questions and offered creative solutions to problems. When I mentioned that I was new to the director role, he offered to share resources that had helped him when he was promoted to department head the previous year. "The transition to management is tough," he said over coffee one afternoon as we discussed a campaign strategy. "Suddenly you're responsible not just for your own work, but for helping everyone else do their best work too. It's rewarding, but it's definitely a learning curve." I appreciated that he understood the challenges of professional growth, that he saw my promotion as an achievement rather than a source of stress or conflict. When I mentioned working late to prepare for a client presentation, he offered practical advice about time management and delegation, rather than suggesting that I was working too hard or focusing too much on my career. These conversations were a revelation. Here was a man who not only respected my professional ambitions, but seemed genuinely excited about them. When I told him about landing a major new client, his congratulations felt authentic and enthusiastic. When I mentioned the challenges of learning new leadership skills, he offered to introduce me to other directors who might serve as mentors. I wasn't looking for anything romantic. My breakup with Marcus was still too fresh, and I was enjoying my independence too much to complicate it with dating. But Daniel's friendship showed me what it felt like to be around someone who saw my career success as an asset rather than a threat, who appreciated my dedication rather than resenting it. One evening, about 6 weeks after my breakup, I was working late in the office when Daniel stopped by my desk. "Still here?" he asked, though his tone was concerned rather than judgmental. "That client presentation really has you stressed, doesn't it?" "A little," I admitted. "It's the biggest account I've managed since the promotion, and I want to make sure everything is perfect. Mind if I take a look?" Sometimes a fresh perspective can help catch things you might have missed. For the next hour, Daniel helped me refine my presentation, offering suggestions that strengthened my arguments and pointing out areas where I could be more concise. His input was invaluable, but what struck me most was how natural it felt to collaborate with him. There was no underlying tension, No sense that he was threatened by my expertise or competitive about being the one with answers. "This is really impressive work," he said as we finished reviewing the final slides. "Your strategic thinking is exactly what this client needs. They're lucky to have you on their account." As he packed up his laptop and prepared to leave, I found myself not wanting the evening to end. Not because I was attracted to him romantically, but because it felt so good to be around someone who appreciated my professional dedication, instead of seeing it as a character flaw. "Daniel," I said as he reached the door, "thank you. Not just for the help tonight, but for being so supportive during this transition. It means more than you know." He smiled, and I noticed for the first time how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was genuinely happy. "That's what colleagues do for each other," he said. "Besides, watching you excel at this job has been inspiring. You have a natural talent for leadership." After he left, I sat alone in the empty office, thinking about how different that interaction had been from the conversations I used to have with Marcus about my work. Daniel saw my late nights as dedication rather than obsession. He saw my desire for perfection as professionalism rather than neurosis. He saw my career growth as something to celebrate rather than something that created distance between us. The client presentation went better than I could have hoped. The account team loved our strategy, approved our budget, and signed a contract extension that would keep them with our agency for another 2 years. When I shared the news with my team, Daniel was the first to congratulate me. "I knew you'd nail it," he said, and his pride in my success felt genuine and uncomplicated. "Want to celebrate? There's a great wine bar around the corner." I hesitated for a moment, not because I didn't want to go, but because I was suddenly aware that my feelings about Daniel might be evolving beyond friendship and professional respect. The invitation felt different somehow, more personal than our usual work conversations. Just as colleagues celebrating a professional victory, I asked, wanting to make sure we were on the same page. "Of course," he said, though there was something in his expression that suggested he might be hoping for more than that eventually. "Unless you'd prefer it to be something else." I considered the question seriously. Was I ready to explore romantic possibilities with someone new? Was it fair to Daniel to start something when I was still processing the end of my relationship with Marcus? But as I looked at this man who had been nothing but supportive and encouraging, who seemed to appreciate everything about me that Marcus had resented, I realized that I didn't want to let fear hold me back from something that could be wonderful. "Let's start with colleagues," I said with a smile, "and see what happens from there." The wine bar was intimate and cozy, with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. As we settled into a corner booth with our drinks, the conversation flowed as easily as it always did, but there was an undercurrent of something new, something that felt like possibility. "Can I ask you something personal?" Daniel said after we had been talking for about an hour. "Sure. You've mentioned that you're recently single, but you've never talked about what happened." I don't want to pry, but I get the sense that it wasn't an amicable split. I took a sip of my wine, considering how much to share. The breakup with Marcus felt like ancient history in some ways, but in other ways it was still too fresh to discuss casually. "It was complicated," I said finally. "We were together for 4 years. But toward the end, it felt like we wanted completely different things from a relationship." "Different how?" I thought about how to explain the dynamic that had developed between Marcus and me, without making it sound like I was bitter or overly critical of my ex. He was going through a difficult time professionally, and I was happy to support him through that. But somewhere along the way, my support started to feel like pressure to him, and my success started to feel like a judgment on his failures. Instead of being a team working through challenges together, we became adversaries where my wins felt like his losses. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds incredibly draining. Relationships should be a source of support and encouragement, not competition and resentment." "Exactly. And I think that's when I realized that I'd rather be alone than be with someone who sees my professional success as a threat to their ego." "His loss," Daniel said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made my heart skip a little. We talked until the wine bar closed, covering everything from our career goals, to our travel dreams, to our thoughts on work-life balance. What struck me most was how easy it was to be completely honest with Daniel about my ambitions and priorities without feeling like I needed to apologize for them or downplay them to protect his feelings. When he walked me to my car, there was a moment of awkwardness as we both seemed to be trying to figure out how to end the evening. Were we friends? Were we colleagues? Were we potentially something more? "I had a really good time tonight," he said, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne. "Me too. Would you like to do this again sometime? Maybe somewhere that doesn't close at 10 on a weeknight?" I looked at him. This man who had spent the evening celebrating my professional victory without a trace of jealousy or resentment, who had listened to my stories about career challenges with genuine interest, and offered thoughtful advice, who seemed to see my ambition as an attractive quality rather than a flaw to be managed. "I'd like that," I said. He smiled, and I felt a flutter of excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. Not just about the possibility of dating someone new, but about the possibility of being with someone who truly appreciated all the parts of myself that I had learned to hide or apologize for during my relationship with Marcus. "Great," he said. "I'll call you tomorrow." As I drove home to my apartment in Capitol Hill, I realized that something significant had shifted in my perspective. For the first time since my breakup, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost when I left Marcus. Instead, I was thinking about what I might gain by opening myself up to something new. The next few weeks passed in a blur of professional success and personal discovery. My new client was thrilled with our initial campaign results and had already started talking about expanding their contract. I was settling into my leadership role with more confidence each day, finding that I genuinely enjoyed mentoring junior team members and developing strategic initiatives. And Daniel had become a regular part of my life. We had coffee together most mornings before work started, discussing everything from current projects to weekend plans. He had introduced me to his favorite hiking trails around Seattle, and I had shared my newfound passion for photography with him. Our relationship was developing naturally, without pressure or expectations, and I found myself looking forward to seeing him in a way that felt both exciting and comfortable. It was during this time that Marcus reached out again, this time with a phone call rather than a text. "Sarah," he said when I answered, and I could hear something different in his voice. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to tell you that I got a job." "That's great, Marcus. I'm happy for you. It's at that consulting firm I interviewed with months ago. Remember? The one you thought I should take more seriously." I did remember. And I also remembered how he had dismissed the opportunity as beneath his qualifications. "They called me back," he continued. "Apparently one of their new hires didn't work out, and they remembered our interview. I start Monday." "That's really wonderful news. I know how much you wanted to get back into consulting." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his tone was more tentative. "Sarah, I've been doing a lot of thinking since you moved out. You were right about a lot of things. I did take your support for granted, and I did let my own insecurity make me resentful of your success. I'm sorry about that." The apology felt more genuine than his previous attempts, less desperate and more reflective, but it also felt too late, not because I was angry with him, but because I had moved on in ways that made revisiting our relationship feel like going backward rather than forward. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully, "and I'm glad you're getting back on track professionally." "I was wondering," he said, and I could hear the hope in his voice, "if maybe we could get coffee sometime, just to talk. I know I hurt you, and I know I have a lot to make up for, but I think we could work things out if you were willing to give us another chance." I was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to respond. A part of me was curious about whether Marcus had genuinely changed, whether the man I had fallen in love with 4 years earlier was still there, underneath the resentment and entitlement that had poisoned our relationship. But a larger part of me knew that it didn't matter anymore. Even if he had changed, even if he could now be the supportive partner I had needed, I had also changed. I had discovered what it felt like to be appreciated for my ambition rather than resented for it, and I couldn't go back to settling for less. "Marcus," I said gently, "I'm glad you're doing well, and I hope this job brings you the satisfaction you've been looking for. But I don't think coffee is a good idea. We both need to move forward with our lives." "Are you seeing someone else?" he asked, and I could hear the hurt in his voice. I thought about Daniel, about the easy compatibility we shared, about how natural it felt to be with someone who celebrated my successes instead of seeing them as threats. But this wasn't really about Daniel. This was about the fact that I had learned to value myself too much to go back to a relationship that required me to diminish my own light to make someone else feel more comfortable. I'm focusing on my career and figuring out what I want my life to look like, I said. And I think you should focus on the same thing. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about how strange it was that Marcus's call hadn't stirred up the emotions I might have expected. I wasn't angry or hurt or tempted to reconsider my decision. If anything, I felt grateful that he had reached out because it confirmed that I had made the right choice in leaving. The man who had once told me I would never find anyone better had been replaced not just by Daniel, but by a version of myself that I liked much better. I had found someone who appreciated my drive instead of resenting it, but more importantly, I had found the confidence to demand that level of appreciation and support. That weekend, Daniel and I went hiking on one of his favorite trails east of the city. As we reached the summit and looked out over the Cascade Mountains, he turned to me with an expression I had learned to recognize as his thoughtful, serious face. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Of course. When I first met you, I was impressed by your professional competence and your strategic thinking. But over the past few weeks, I've realized that what I'm most attracted to is your confidence in yourself and your goals. You know what you want, and you're not apologetic about working toward it. That's incredibly attractive." I felt my heart swell with something that felt like recognition and validation and possibility all rolled into one. "You know what I find attractive about you?" I said, turning to face him fully. "What?" "The way you see my ambition as an asset rather than a liability. The way you celebrate my successes instead of seeing them as competition. The way you make me feel like being driven and goal-oriented is something to be proud of rather than something to apologize for." He smiled and reached for my hand, and as our fingers intertwined, I thought about how different this felt from my relationship with Marcus. There was no underlying tension, no sense that I needed to manage his emotions or protect his ego. There was just mutual respect and appreciation, and the exciting possibility of building something together rather than one person supporting the other. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but serious, "I know we haven't been dating very long, and I don't want to rush anything. But I want you to know that I see a future with you. Not because I need you to take care of me, or because I want you to sacrifice your goals for mine, but because I think we could build something really wonderful together as equals." I looked at this man who saw my strength as something to celebrate rather than something to manage, who wanted to build a partnership based on mutual support rather than dependence, and I realized that Marcus had been completely wrong about my prospects. Not only had I found someone better, I had found someone who was better in ways I hadn't even known to hope for. "I see a future with you too," I said, and as he leaned down to kiss me with the Seattle mountains spread out behind us, I thought about how grateful I was that I had been brave enough to demand more for myself than settling for someone who couldn't appreciate what I had to offer. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be, and finding someone who loves you for it, rather than despite it. Marcus had been wrong about a lot of things, but he had been most wrong about this. I had found someone else, someone better, someone who saw my independence and success as reasons to love me, rather than reasons to resent me. And the best part was, I had found him, not by looking for a replacement for what I had lost, but by becoming so comfortable with who I was, that I attracted someone who appreciated that person completely. 6 months after my breakup with Marcus, I was standing in the conference room of our biggest client, presenting the quarterly results of our marketing campaign. The numbers were exceptional. Engagement was up 40%, conversions had increased by 35%, and brand awareness had reached new heights. As I clicked through the presentation slides, I could see the genuine excitement on our clients' faces, and I felt a surge of professional pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or validation. "These results are beyond what we hoped for," said Jennifer Walsh, the client's marketing VP. "Sarah, your strategic vision has transformed our entire approach to digital marketing. We'd like to discuss expanding our contract to include our product launch in the European market." After the meeting, as I walked back to my car in downtown Seattle, I called Daniel to share the good news. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the smile in his voice even before he spoke. "How did it go?" he asked. "They want to expand the contract to Europe," I said, unable to contain my excitement. "It's the biggest opportunity our agency has ever had." "Sarah, that's incredible! I'm so proud of you. This is exactly what you've been working toward." His genuine enthusiasm made my heart flutter in a way that still surprised me. Even after 6 months of dating, there was no hesitation in his celebration, no underlying concern about what my success might mean for him or our relationship. Just pure, uncomplicated joy in my achievement. "Want to celebrate tonight?" he asked. "I know this amazing little restaurant in Fremont that just opened. Their chef trained in Paris." "I'd love that," I said, and as I ended the call, I realized how dramatically my life had changed in such a short time. A year ago, sharing professional success with Marcus had always felt complicated, tinged with his resentment and insecurity. Now, celebrating achievements felt natural and joyful, the way it should be in a healthy relationship. That evening, as Daniel and I shared a bottle of champagne at the French restaurant, I found myself reflecting on how much I had grown since leaving Marcus. The woman who had once felt guilty about working late or achieving professional milestones was gone, replaced by someone who owned her ambitions unapologetically. "You know what I love most about watching you succeed?" Daniel said, raising his glass in a toast. "What?" "The way you light up when you talk about your work. You don't just see it as a job, you see it as a calling. That passion is one of the things I fell in love with about you." Fell in love with. It was the first time either of us had used those words, and they hung in the air between us, significant and wonderful, and slightly terrifying. "Daniel," I said softly, "I love you too." The words felt right in a way that surprised me. Not because I hadn't known my feelings were heading in that direction, but because saying them felt so natural, so uncomplicated. There was no underlying anxiety about whether my love would be received well or used against me later. There was just the simple joy of sharing my feelings with someone who had earned them completely. He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "I know this might seem fast," he said, "but I've been thinking about asking you to move in with me." My heart skipped a beat. After my experience with Marcus, the idea of cohabitation brought up complicated feelings. Living with someone again meant sharing space, sharing responsibilities, sharing a life in ways that could either strengthen a relationship or reveal fundamental incompatibilities. "What would that look like?" I asked carefully. "It would look like two independent people choosing to build a life together," he said without hesitation. "Two people with their own careers, their own goals, their own interests, who also happen to love spending time together. It would look like partnership, not dependency." The distinction he was making was crucial, and I appreciated that he understood why I might be hesitant. "I love my apartment," I said honestly. "It's the first place that's been entirely mine, and I'm not ready to give up that independence completely." "What if you didn't have to? What if we found a place together, but you kept your apartment for now? A sort of gradual transition where we both maintain our own spaces while we figure out how we work as live-in partners?" The thoughtfulness of his suggestion struck me. Instead of pushing for what he wanted or trying to convince me to abandon my concerns, he was offering a solution that honored both our needs. "That's actually a really good idea," I said. "It would give us a chance to see how we function as roommates without either of us giving up our safety nets." "Exactly. And if it turns out that I leave dishes in the sink, or you hog the bathroom for hours getting ready for work, we can retreat to our respective corners and reassess." I laughed, but I also felt a deep sense of gratitude for his approach to our relationship. Everything about the way Daniel handled conflict and decisions felt like a partnership rather than a negotiation between adversaries. Over the next few weeks, we started looking at apartments together. It was a completely different experience from apartment hunting alone. Daniel had opinions about neighborhoods and floor plans, but he also respected my preferences and budget concerns. When I mentioned that I wanted a home office space for freelance projects I was considering, he didn't question whether that was necessary or suggest that I was being too focused on work. Instead, he helped me identify apartments with layouts that would accommodate both our needs. We found a beautiful 2-bedroom place in Queen Anne, with large windows, hardwood floors, and enough space for both of us to have dedicated work areas. As we stood in the empty living room, imagining our furniture arranged in the space, I felt excited rather than anxious about the prospect of sharing a home again. "This feels right," Daniel said, echoing my thoughts exactly. "It really does." That night, as we celebrated our decision to lease the apartment, I received an unexpected text message. "Marcus, heard through mutual friends that you're doing really well professionally. Wanted to say congratulations. I always knew you were destined for big things." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out what response, if any, was appropriate. His tone was different from his previous attempts to contact me, less desperate, more mature, but I also wondered what had prompted him to reach out now, after months of silence. I showed the message to Daniel, curious about his perspective. "Sounds like he's trying to reconnect," Daniel said after reading it. "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I don't feel much of anything. It's like hearing from an old colleague I haven't thought about in years." "That's probably a good sign," he said with a smile. "It means you've really moved on." I realized he was right. Marcus's text didn't stir up old feelings or make me question my decisions. If anything, it highlighted how much my life had improved since our breakup. I was succeeding professionally, I was in love with someone who celebrated my success, and I was building a future based on mutual respect and shared goals rather than dependency and resentment. I decided not to respond to Marcus's message. Not out of anger or spite, but because there was simply nothing to say. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no desire to reopen it even for casual conversation. 3 weeks later, Daniel and I moved into our new apartment together. The process was surprisingly smooth. We divided responsibilities based on our strengths and preferences rather than defaulting to traditional gender roles, and we made decisions together without anyone having to sacrifice their vision completely. As we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, I marveled at how different this felt from setting up a home with Marcus. There was no underlying tension about who was contributing more, or who got to make decisions about decoration and layout. We were both invested in creating a space that reflected both our personalities and supported both our lifestyles. "I love this," Daniel said as we collapsed on our new couch after a long day of moving. "I love that your book collection takes up 3 whole shelves. And I love that my photography equipment has its own corner. And I love that we both have spaces to work without getting in each other's way." "I love that you love those things," I said, curling up against his side. "I love that I don't have to apologize for taking up space or having interests that require time and attention. Why would you ever have to apologize for that?" The question was innocent, but it reminded me of how much I had changed since my relationship with Marcus. I no longer expected to have to defend my interests or downplay my ambitions to make a partner comfortable. I had learned to value myself enough to only be with someone who valued those parts of me too. Living with Daniel proved to be everything I had hoped it would be. We fell into routines that worked for both of us. Early morning workouts together, coffee and newspaper reading before heading to our respective offices, evening cooking sessions where we took turns choosing recipes and sharing stories about our days. Most importantly, we supported each other's professional growth without competition or resentment. When Daniel was chosen to lead a major rebranding project for a tech startup, I was genuinely thrilled for him and offered to brainstorm ideas when he was struggling with creative direction. When I was promoted again, this time to senior marketing director with a team of 12 people reporting to me, Daniel took me out for dinner and spent the entire evening asking thoughtful questions about my new management responsibilities. "I'm so proud of you," he said as we walked home from dinner that night. "Watching you grow into leadership has been incredible. You have such a natural ability to inspire people and make them feel valued." "Thank you," I said, and I realized that accepting compliments about my professional abilities had become natural rather than uncomfortable. I feel like I'm finally in a role where I can make a real impact. "You make an impact everywhere you go," he said, stopping to kiss me under a streetlight. "At work, with friends, with me. You make everything better just by being yourself." 6 months into living together, we hosted our first dinner party. I invited my colleagues, Jennifer and Michael, along with my friend Melissa, who had been supportive throughout my breakup and transition. Daniel invited his brother Tom and his partner Alex, plus a few friends from his design team. As I watched our guests mingling in our living room, sharing stories and laughing over the meal we had prepared together, I felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what I had always wanted. A partnership that enhanced both our lives rather than requiring one person to sacrifice for the other. A home that reflected both our personalities. A social life built around people who appreciated and supported us both. "You look happy," Melissa said, joining me in the kitchen as I prepared dessert. "I am happy," I said, and the simplicity of that statement struck me. I am really, genuinely happy. It shows, and Daniel clearly adores you. The way he talks about your work achievements is like he's personally invested in your success. He is, I said. We both are invested in each other's success. It's such a different dynamic from what I'm used to. You deserve this, Sarah. You deserve someone who sees your strength as an asset rather than a threat. Later that evening, after our guests had gone home and we were cleaning up the kitchen together, Daniel brought up something that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking," he said as he loaded dishes into the dishwasher, "about the future, about what we're building together." "What about it?" "I know we've only been living together for 6 months, but this feels right in a way that makes me want to start planning for the long term, not rushing anything but just acknowledging that this isn't casual for me anymore." I paused in wiping down the counters, considering his words. The idea of long-term planning didn't frighten me the way it might have a year ago. With Marcus, talk of the future had always felt loaded with expectations and conditions. With Daniel, it felt like a natural extension of what we were already building together. "What kind of long-term planning?" I asked. "The kind where we talk about whether we want the same things. Marriage, kids, career goals, where we want to live, how we want to spend our time. The kind where we make sure we're compatible in the ways that matter for building a life together." I appreciated his directness. Instead of assuming we wanted the same things or avoiding difficult conversations until they became sources of conflict, he was suggesting we proactively discuss our compatibility and goals. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like to know that we're working toward the same vision of what our life together could look like." Over the next few weeks, we had a series of conversations about our future. We talked about career aspirations, his goal of eventually starting his own design firm, my dream of becoming a marketing VP at a major corporation, or perhaps launching my own consultancy. We discussed our thoughts on marriage and children, our financial goals, our ideas about work-life balance. What struck me most about these conversations was how easy they were. Daniel and I shared similar values about partnership and independence, about supporting each other's growth while maintaining our own identities. We both wanted children eventually, but we also both believed that having kids should enhance a strong relationship rather than fix a troubled one. We both valued financial security, but we also understood that money was a tool for building the life we wanted rather than an end in itself. Most importantly, we both believed that a successful relationship required two whole, independent people choosing to build something together rather than two incomplete people trying to fill each other's gaps. It was during one of these conversations that Daniel surprised me with a question I hadn't expected. "Sarah," he said one evening as we sat on our couch with cups of tea, "I know this might seem premature, but I've been thinking about proposing to you." My heart stopped for a moment, not from fear but from excitement. "Not right now," he continued quickly, reading my expression, "but soon. Maybe in the next 6 months or so, but I wanted to talk to you about it first, to make sure it's something you'd want when the time feels right." The thoughtfulness of his approach took my breath away. Instead of surprising me with a proposal that might feel pressured or overwhelming, he was giving me the opportunity to share my feelings and timeline. "Daniel," I said softly, "I would love to marry you. Not because I need to be married or because I'm afraid of being alone, but because I can't imagine building a life with anyone else." His smile was radiant, and he reached for my hands. "I love that you said it that way," he said, "because that's exactly how I feel too. I want to marry you not because I need you to complete me, but because I want to choose you every day for the rest of my life." We spent the rest of the evening talking about what marriage meant to us, what kind of wedding we might want, how we envisioned our roles as spouses. Once again, I was struck by how natural and uncomplicated these conversations felt, There was no underlying anxiety about whether we wanted the same things or whether one of us would have to sacrifice our vision for the other. 2 months later, Daniel proposed during a weekend hiking trip to the Olympic Peninsula. We had reached the summit of a particularly challenging trail, and as we sat looking out over the mountain range, he pulled out a ring that was exactly what I would have chosen for myself. Elegant, classic, but with unique details that reflected my personality. "Sarah Chen," he said, getting down on one knee despite the rocky terrain, "you are the strongest, most passionate, most inspiring person I know. You make me want to be a better man, not by asking me to change, but by showing me what it looks like to live authentically and pursue your dreams unapologetically. Will you marry me?" "Yes," I said without hesitation, and as he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed since the day Marcus told me I would never find anyone better. Not only had I found someone better, I had found someone who was better in ways I hadn't even known were possible. I had found someone who celebrated my success rather than resenting it, who supported my dreams rather than seeing them as competition, who wanted to build a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. But more than that, I had found a version of myself that I liked much better. I had learned to value my own worth enough to demand treatment that reflected it. I had discovered that being alone was preferable to being with someone who couldn't appreciate what I had to offer. I had developed the confidence to walk away from situations that didn't serve me, even when walking away was difficult and uncertain. As we made our way back down the mountain, my new engagement ring catching the afternoon sunlight, I thought about how grateful I was that Marcus had been wrong about my prospects. His cruel prediction that I would never find anyone better had motivated me to become someone who wouldn't settle for less than I deserved. The engagement announcement generated enthusiastic responses from our friends and family. Even my parents, who had always liked Marcus despite his flaws, were thrilled about Daniel after meeting him just once. "He looks at you the way your father looks at me," my mother said during our engagement celebration dinner. "Like he can't believe his luck in finding you." "That's because I can't," Daniel said, overhearing her comment. "Sarah is the best thing that ever happened to me." A few days after our engagement, I received another unexpected message from Marcus. This time it was an email rather than a text, and the tone was quite different from his previous communications. "Sarah," it read, "I heard through mutual friends that you got engaged. I wanted to reach out and congratulate you. I also wanted to apologize, really apologize, for the way I treated you during our relationship, and especially during our breakup. I've been in therapy for the past year, working on understanding why I reacted so poorly to your success and independence. I realize now that my insecurity and fear of inadequacy made me resentful of the very qualities that made you an amazing partner. You deserved so much better than what I gave you, and I'm genuinely happy that you found someone who appreciates you the way I should have. I hope you have a wonderful life together." I read the email twice, surprised by its maturity and apparent sincerity. This didn't sound like the man who had told me I was too demanding and career-focused to find love, who had predicted I would end up alone and regretful. This sounded like someone who had done genuine work on himself and had gained perspective on our relationship. I showed the email to Daniel, curious about his reaction. "That's really mature of him," Daniel said after reading it. "It takes courage to acknowledge your mistakes and apologize without expecting anything in return." "It does," I agreed, "and it makes me feel good about my judgment, actually. The man I fell in love with 4 years ago was capable of this kind of growth and self-reflection. He just wasn't ready for it when we were together." "Are you going to respond?" I considered the question. Part of me appreciated Marcus's apology and wanted to acknowledge his growth. But another part of me felt that responding might reopen a door that was better left closed. "I think I'll send a brief, polite response," I said finally. "He deserves to know that his apology was received well, even if I don't want to reestablish contact." I wrote back, "Marcus, thank you for your thoughtful message and your apology. I'm glad you're doing well, and that you've been working on personal growth. I wish you all the best in your future relationships and endeavors." It felt like the right way to close that chapter, acknowledging his effort to make amends while maintaining appropriate boundaries. As Daniel and I began planning our wedding, I was struck by how different the process was from what I had imagined it would be during my relationship with Marcus. Every decision we made together felt collaborative rather than competitive. When we disagreed about details like venue or catering options, we talked through our preferences and found solutions that worked for both of us. Most importantly, planning our wedding felt like an extension of the partnership we had already built, rather than a source of stress or conflict. We both wanted a celebration that reflected our values and personalities, and we both understood that the wedding was just one day in what we hoped would be a long and happy marriage. "I love that we both want the same things," Daniel said one evening as we reviewed vendor proposals. "A beautiful celebration with the people we care about, good food and music, and a focus on what we're actually celebrating rather than just trying to impress anyone." "I love that too," I said. "And I love that planning this feels exciting rather than overwhelming. That's because we're planning it together instead of one person having to manage everything while the other person just shows up." His comment reminded me of how differently Daniel approached shared responsibilities compared to Marcus. Instead of assuming that I would handle the details because I was more organized or more invested in the outcome, Daniel saw wedding planning as something we should tackle together as a team. The wedding itself was everything we had hoped it would be. We chose a venue overlooking Puget Sound with views of the Olympic Mountains, and we kept the guest list small but meaningful: family, close friends, and the colleagues, who had become genuine friends over the years. As I walked down the aisle toward Daniel, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had led me to this moment. The woman who had once felt guilty about working late and achieving professional success was gone, replaced by someone who owned her ambitions and attracted partners who celebrated them. During our vows, Daniel said something that perfectly captured what our relationship meant to me. "Sarah, I promise to love all of you, your ambition, your dedication, your strength, and your independence. I promise to celebrate your successes as enthusiastically as you celebrate mine, and to support your dreams, even when they require sacrifice from both of us. I promise to be your partner in building a life that honors both our goals and aspirations." When it was my turn, I said, "Daniel, I promise to love you not because I need you to complete me, but because I choose you as my partner in building something beautiful together. I promise to maintain my own identity and interests, while also creating space for our shared dreams. I promise to support your growth and success with the same enthusiasm you've shown for mine." As we exchanged rings and kissed as husband and wife, I thought about Marcus's prediction that I would never find anyone better than him. Not only had he been wrong, but his cruelty had ultimately motivated me to become someone who wouldn't settle for less than I deserved. The reception was filled with toasts from friends and family members who spoke about what they had observed in our relationship. Jennifer from work mentioned how happy I seemed since meeting Daniel, how my confidence had blossomed in ways that enhanced both my personal and professional life. Daniel's brother Tom talked about how Daniel had changed since we started dating, becoming more focused and driven because he was inspired by my example, rather than threatened by it. But the toast that meant the most to me came from Melissa, my friend who had supported me through the difficult months of my breakup with Marcus. "I've watched Sarah grow into someone who knows her worth and refuses to settle for anything less than she deserves," she said, raising her glass. "And I've watched Daniel love her not despite her strength and ambition, but because of them. This is what real partnership looks like: two whole people choosing to build something beautiful together." As we danced our first dance as husband and wife, Daniel whispered in my ear, "Thank you for being brave enough to leave a situation that wasn't right for you. If you hadn't, we never would have found each other. Thank you for being the kind of man who sees my independence as something to celebrate rather than something to manage," I whispered back. Later that evening, as we were saying goodbye to our guests, I overheard a conversation between two of Daniel's friends. "Man, Daniel really hit the jackpot with Sarah," one of them said. "She's successful, beautiful, smart, and she clearly adores him." "Yeah, but he's perfect for her too," the other replied. "My wife knows Sarah from work, and she says Sarah is completely different since they got together. More confident, more herself. That's what the right relationship does. It brings out the best in both people." Their observations stayed with me as Daniel and I left for our honeymoon in Italy. They were right that we brought out the best in each other, but not because we completed each other's deficiencies. Instead, we enhanced each other's strengths and supported each other's growth. During our honeymoon, as we explored Rome and Florence and the Tuscan countryside, I marveled at how easy it was to travel with Daniel. We had similar energy levels and interests, but we also respected each other's need for different experiences. When I wanted to spend hours in the Uffizi galleries studying Renaissance art, he was genuinely interested in learning alongside me. When he wanted to take photography walks through small villages at sunrise, I was excited to join him and learn about composition and lighting. I love that. We can share our passions with each other, he said one evening as we sat in a cafe in a hilltop town, watching the sunset over the vineyards. I love that sharing them feels natural rather than obligatory, I replied. I love that you're interested in the things I care about because you're interested in me, not because you feel like you have to be. On our last night in Italy, as we sat on the terrace of our hotel overlooking the Mediterranean, Daniel brought up something that had been on his mind. I've been thinking about what we want our marriage to look like day to day, he said. Not just the big picture stuff we talked about before we got engaged, but the small ways we can make sure we keep growing together instead of apart. What kinds of things? Like making sure we continue to pursue our individual interests and friendships, even as we build our life together. Like checking in regularly about our professional goals and how we can support each other in achieving them. Like maintaining open communication about what we need from each other instead of assuming the other person should just know. I loved that he was thinking about the practical aspects of maintaining a strong marriage rather than assuming that love alone would be enough to navigate challenges. I think that's incredibly smart, I said. I want us to keep being the people we were when we fell in love with each other, not lose ourselves in trying to be what we think a married couple should be. Exactly. I fell in love with an ambitious, driven, independent woman. I want to make sure our marriage supports those qualities rather than diminishing them. As we flew home from our honeymoon, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 2 years. The woman who had once worked 60-hour weeks to support an unemployed boyfriend who resented her for it, was now married to a man who saw her professional dedication as one of her most attractive qualities. But the most important change wasn't external, it was internal. I had learned to value myself enough to demand treatment that reflected my worth. I had discovered that being alone was preferable to being with someone who couldn't appreciate what I had to offer. I had developed the confidence to pursue relationships that enhanced my life rather than requiring me to diminish it. Marcus had been wrong about almost everything when he predicted that I would never find anyone better than him. But in one way, his cruelty had been a gift. It had forced me to examine what I was willing to accept in a relationship and what I deserved instead. It had motivated me to become someone who wouldn't settle for less than genuine partnership and mutual respect. 6 months after our wedding, I received a promotion to Vice President of Marketing at our agency. It was a role I had been working toward for years, with responsibilities that included overseeing multiple departments and developing strategic initiatives for our biggest clients. When I shared the news with Daniel, his reaction was everything I had come to expect from him. Pure excitement and pride with no underlying concern about what my success might mean for him or our relationship. "Sarah, this is incredible," he said, lifting me off my feet in a celebratory hug. "You've worked so hard for this, and you absolutely deserve it." "Thank you," I said, and I realized that accepting his excitement and support had become second nature. I'm nervous about the new responsibilities, but I'm also thrilled about the opportunity to make a bigger impact. You're going to be amazing at it. You have such a natural talent for leadership and strategy. That evening, as we celebrated my promotion over dinner at our favorite restaurant, I thought about how different this conversation would have been with Marcus. Instead of celebrating my achievement, he would have found ways to make it about him, his insecurity, his unemployment, his feelings of inadequacy compared to my success. With Daniel, my professional growth was simply something to be proud of and excited about. He didn't see my success as a threat to his masculinity or a judgment on his worth. He saw it as evidence of the qualities he had fallen in love with in the first place. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel said as we walked home from dinner that night. "Of course. Watching you succeed and grow in your career has made me more ambitious about my own goals. Seeing how you pursue what you want with such focus and determination has inspired me to be more intentional about building my design firm." His comment highlighted one of the things I loved most about our relationship. Instead of my success creating competition or resentment between us, it served as motivation and inspiration for both of us to pursue our individual goals while supporting each other along the way. I love that, I said, taking his hand as we walked through our neighborhood. I love that we make each other better instead of holding each other back. Me too. I love that we're both ambitious and driven, and that those qualities complement each other instead of creating conflict. A year into my role as VP, I was approached by a headhunter about an opportunity to become Chief Marketing Officer at a major tech company in San Francisco. It was exactly the kind of position I had always dreamed of: significant responsibility, impressive salary, the chance to shape marketing strategy for a company that was reshaping its industry. The only complication was that it would require relocating from Seattle, which would mean asking Daniel to leave the city where he had grown up and where his design business was thriving. When I brought up the opportunity over dinner one evening, I was nervous about how he would react. Moving to a new city for my career would require sacrifice from both of us, but particularly from him. "Tell me about it," he said, setting down his fork and giving me his full attention. I described the role, the company, the growth potential, and the timeline for making a decision. Throughout my explanation, Daniel listened thoughtfully, asking questions about my enthusiasm for the opportunity and what it would mean for my long-term career goals. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when I finished. "Excited, but conflicted," I said honestly. "It's everything I've worked toward professionally, but I don't want to ask you to uproot your life for my career." "Sarah," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "this isn't about asking me to sacrifice for your career. This is about both of us making decisions that support our long-term goals as individuals and as a couple. But your business is here, your family is here, your whole network is here. And those things are important, but they're not more important than your dreams or our partnership. Besides, San Francisco has a thriving design scene. There could be opportunities for me there that don't exist here." Over the next week, we had multiple conversations about the potential move. Daniel researched the design market in San Francisco, reached out to contacts he had in the Bay Area, and even looked into commercial real estate for potentially opening a second office of his firm. "I've been thinking," he said one evening as we took our usual walk around our neighborhood, "and I think this could be a great opportunity for both of us. You'd get to pursue your dream job, and I'd get to expand my business into a new market." "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't want you to say yes just because you think it's what I want to hear. I'm sure, because I know that supporting your success makes our relationship stronger, not weaker. I'm sure because I trust that if the situation were reversed, you would be just as supportive of my opportunities. And I'm sure because I want to be married to someone who pursues her dreams, even when it requires courage and change." His response reminded me once again of why I had fallen in love with him. Daniel didn't see my ambitions as threats to be managed or burdens to be endured. He saw them as integral parts of who I was and what made our partnership dynamic and fulfilling. I accepted the position in San Francisco, and we spent the next 2 months preparing for our move. Daniel successfully negotiated deals that allowed him to maintain his Seattle clients while developing new business in California. We found a beautiful apartment in the Mission District with space for both of us to have home offices. The transition was smoother than either of us had expected. My new role was challenging but rewarding, with responsibilities that stretched my skills and pushed me to grow as a leader. Daniel's business expansion was successful, and he quickly established himself in the San Francisco design community. Most importantly, our relationship continued to thrive in our new city. We explored neighborhoods together, discovered new restaurants and hiking trails, and built a social circle that appreciated both our individual accomplishments and our partnership. 6 months after our move, we were having dinner with new friends when someone asked how we had met and what made our relationship work so well. "We bring out the best in each other," Daniel said simply. "We challenge each other to grow while also providing support and encouragement along the way. And we see each other's success as something to celebrate rather than something to compete with," I added. "When one of us achieves something significant, it makes both of us proud." Later that evening, as we walked home through our new neighborhood, I reflected on how far I had traveled from the woman who had once felt guilty about working late and achieving professional success. Do you ever think about what your life would have looked like if you had stayed with Marcus? Daniel asked, as if reading my thoughts. Sometimes, I said honestly, and I realized that I probably would have ended up resenting both him and myself. I would have spent years trying to make someone love qualities that he saw as flaws, and I probably would have started believing that my ambitions really were character defects rather than strengths. His loss became my gain, Daniel said, stopping to kiss me under a streetlight. No, I said, smiling at him. His loss became my gain. I gained a partner who appreciates me completely, but more importantly, I gained the confidence to demand that level of appreciation. As we continued walking home, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Marcus's cruel prediction that I would never find anyone better had turned out to be spectacularly wrong, but not just because I had found Daniel. It had been wrong because it was based on the premise that my strength and ambition were liabilities rather than assets, that my independence was something to be managed rather than celebrated. The truth was that by learning to value myself appropriately, I had attracted someone who valued me the same way. By refusing to settle for less than I deserved, I had created space in my life for someone who could give me everything I had always wanted in a partnership. Marcus had been wrong about my prospects, but he had been right about one thing. I was demanding. I was demanding of respect, appreciation, partnership, and mutual support. And it turned out that being demanding in those ways had led me to exactly the kind of relationship I had always hoped was possible. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong through anger or spite. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong through anger or spite. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living so well, loving so completely, and succeeding so thoroughly that their negativity becomes irrelevant. As I stood in my San Francisco office overlooking the bay, wedding ring catching the afternoon light, I smiled thinking about Marcus's words. You'll never find anyone else. He had been spectacularly wrong. I hadn't just found someone else. I had found myself, and in doing so, I had attracted a partner who celebrated every part of who I was. The woman who once settled for crumbs had learned to demand the whole feast, and it was delicious. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.